Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. And welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend and are facing the week all lovely and refreshed. It's been a bit of a ball of a Monday on this side of the world, but hey, we're getting through it, that's for sure. So I hope you are too. And I know you Americans are just starting your days now, or your day now rather. But just to let you know, it's a good day. It's a good day. So you'll have a good day too. I was actually reading something quite interesting. Not just funny, obviously. Someone said, well, if the Brits are so far ahead of America on time, can't they just tell us the future? I said, yeah, well, I'm telling you the future. It's a good day.
Listen, we were chatting off camera and everything, we know we're walking into like eclipse season. Today's a big moon day. We've got, obviously Ishtar, Easter coming up. This is a huge, and we've got Mercury retrograde coming up again. But with every little thing that's spilling out, the little uh-ohs that are happening right now with the controllers of the world, the oopsie-daisies, I'm living for this time. I'm living for what's going on in the world, and karma is a bitch. But if you're not the one that dished out the karma, just sit back and enjoy.
Well, let's never forget karma works both ways.
Yep,
so at the
absolutely.
same time, if you are due for some pretty fabulous karma, it's on the way too, and it's right there for the taking.
I am
enjoy that.
I'm not normally, and we've talked about this, Shanti, and I will say, I was telling you, I was up really early this morning. I filmed at 5 a.m. with Tamara in Australia and Jessica Jones, the Cryptid Hunt. She remote viewed. We did a show on Kate Middleton, and I am trying desperately right now to get it uploaded to Rumble, so I won't say too much about what was spoken about in that show. But I am literally dying. Like, I really, they say if you give your enemy enough, don't interrupt your enemy when they're in the process of hanging themselves. And I'm dying at I'm laughing so hard at the old guard right now, because they literally look like idiots trying so desperately to convince us of one story. And these we make fun of the younger generations, this Generation Z that's coming up in their 20s now. These kiddos were raised on computers.
We were raised outside flinging mud pies at each other.
You might be able to fool us with some like Photoshop photos, but you ain't gonna be fooling a 20-year-old. They were raised on this shit. And so the fact that they created these systems, I know Mr. Fox had said this before, like they created this to try to control us, but remember, darkness can't create anything, only the light can. So we're using it in the positive way. And we've got these young Generation Zers out there being like, here's where it's photoshopped, here's where it's photoshopped. This video that was put out is 98% AI, 1% human. Why is she wearing the same outfit she wore in 2016? She's a princess. They don't repeat outfits. I repeat outfits all the time, but I'm a peasant. So, like I said, I'd rather be a peasant than a royal any day. And then and we'll talk more about this on Wednesday, but it kind of relates to what, the Knights of Malta. We were, y'all, Shanti, what happened this weekend with the Hildebrandt Franke
guys, you have got to tune into Bryce and I on Wednesday on Solutions, because because I'm ahead of your time.
Yeah.
I suddenly had all these drops. I think it was on Friday. And suddenly everything, just more information, the arrests, the journals, Kevin Franke. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to send this stuff to Bryce. And then, of course, you said, have you seen this? I said, oh, hell yeah. It was it's absolutely amazing, the information. I mean, that's why I say this is such a great time to be alive, It's a crazy tsunami tidal wave time. And that's why if you've learned how to surf the waves, we're good, right? And if you've learned how to go with the flow of the oceans, you're good, because this is really calling for that. They say anyone who lives at the oceans knows that if you're being pulled in by the tide, and especially a rip tide and stuff like that, you just lay back, you chill, and you just allow the tide to take you, and
Yep.
it's going to dump you on the beach a little bit further down. It's
Yep.
the same thing that's happening here. I want to just say that to you as well, because there is so much going on. And talking about karma, you know, I mean, I've changed my mind significantly about that Ruby Franke woman, because I mean, I always thought she was a bit of a victim. But, you know, then we look at law of attraction, right? And like attracts like.
Yep.
So you're always going to be getting people who attract each other. And
Yep.
it might seem like the victim and the villain. And, you know, but when you're looking at how this woman has treated her kids in the past, when you see the vindictive nature of how she's treated her children, when, you know, and this is church gone bad. And again, please, I don't want anyone to think I'm persecuting you. I've always, anyone who knows me and has been listening, and Bryce, you too, knows that when we're dealing with organized religion, and especially the Mormon church, churches like the Mormon church, right? That is a haven for infiltrators and infestors of God's good word. Right?
Yeah, God is not the church. The church and God are two totally different things.
Yes, the church has been infected by the Illuminati.
With the church, my issue is with the cabal, basically. And here's the thing: like, I want to make like I've said this before. I freaking love the Mormons. Like, I have so many I've had Mormon friends. They're beautiful, beautiful people. So I understand that Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt are not representative of most of the Mormons. But when we look, you guys, all y'all, as we say in the South, if you read Ruby Franke's journal was released. So here's what happened, y'all, especially for those who are not from the United States. In the United States, and I want to kind of preface this for Wednesday, because I said to Shanti, I was like, we need like a call-in show. We need to hear what our viewers like are their opinions, because I'm just going to say this. I did not have paranormal phenomenon on my bingo card for the Hildebrandt Franke. And when y'all, there is so much more to this story than this is not just a simple child abuse case. This is like deep. And when you read, so in the United States, let me back up a little bit so we can prepare for Wednesday shows for those who want to join us and have something to say about this. In the United States, every single state, we're a republic, or we're supposed to be a republic. That means that every single state works as its own country. Even though we don't, we have state borders, but no one checks. You just drive through, right? But every state has their own laws. We have federal law and we have state law. So when it comes to the most fascinating thing about the Hildebrandt Franke case is that it's in Utah. And a lot of us have learned a lot about Utah law. Like, first of all, this is a second-degree felony, because in Utah, it's like child abuse isn't what? It's not first degree. Like, what the hell? Like, why isn't it first degree? That's a story for a different day. But the parole board, so because Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt pled guilty, the parole board, they now have pled guilty. So it's not going to be a trial. The judge does not sentence them. Like in most states, a parole board sentences them. So from my understanding, and people can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, after they've pled guilty or have been found guilty, about 30 days, the parole board has about 30 days to hold on to all the evidence in order to come up with their sentence. So I'm assuming they've come up with the sentence, and then they release all the evidence to the public. And y'all, this weekend, I already had my research done for today, but I had planned on doing all this other research this weekend. Nope. My ass was sitting here with my cell phone to the Law and Crime channel, which is a channel on YouTube, going through all the body cam footage from the police officers. Holy shit, when I say it showed the neighborhood where the kids, because this is a rich neighborhood, a lot of those houses had cameras. I started crying when I saw Russell. I mean, they blurred his face out, and I was in bed, and
those little legs, and the most heartbreaking thing, they show you where the first time, before he gets to the neighbor that called 911, he goes to another neighbor, walking up there and gingerly knocking on the door, and no one came. But these little legs that are like this, and these things around his ankles, you can still see the tape around his ankles. This little kid. And then you see also now when he goes to the next house as well, right? And then he has the old man coming out there who says, what's going on, kid? He says, can you please do me a favor and call the police? It's a personal matter. My heart shattered. This little thing. But you know, without giving away too much, guys, I'd love for you to join us on Wednesday on Solutions when we're going to be talking more into this. And Bryce and I were thinking we would love to have a phone in, but I don't think we can have a phone in show like that. But maybe, you know, Bryce, you and I can chat afterwards.
I mean, we can even, I mean, I don't even mind. I don't know how StreamYard works because I don't use StreamYard, but I mean, Zoom.
We can go on Zoom. Maybe, but let's see. We'll talk about it. You and I can chat about it afterwards and we'll let you guys know. But it's really, I think this is such an important case to maybe you don't want to follow it, but at least be aware what's going on, to see the manipulation that's through psychology or through these mental health fitness coach, right?
But that's not even a real thing, you guys. Like people, so like that's not even like a real. What I want to say too, and why this is so important, and we can elaborate more on this on Wednesday. So I'm going to encourage. This is like a promotion for Wednesday show before we get into the subject today. I'm going to encourage you guys. You can go to the Law and Crime channel on YouTube. It's a big channel. They have all the footage from the police. I will say this. In multiple cases of this footage, the paramedics, because they have their cameras on their vest, so they're not actually shooting, it's just on their vest. So I would assume that if you have a video on your vest, you forget it's there sometimes. So these people were not acting. Did you see, Shanti, multiple times paramedics had to walk away, grown-ass adults, because they were going to start crying?
Oh yeah, definitely. The one police officer was crying, the blonde one.
Yeah, she had to walk away from the child because it was such a horrific. And they talked about the smell. Most of them talked about like when
they could smell the flesh, the cayenne pepper and honey that they were putting into these raw open wounds. Just terrible. But you know, I mean, I am so happy that this information has come to the fore, because there's too much of this terrible stuff going on.
I want to smack Ruby, Frankie. Like, she's a year older than me, and I've never had the opportunity to have children, and I've always wanted. That's one of the biggest pains in my life, is not having a child. And this woman was given 6 beautiful children. 6. And she does this shit. But I think what's important, Shanti, and I'll leave it at this before we get into it, is especially if you guys watch especially the Kevin, my opinion has totally changed on Kevin Franke. He gets into some paranormal stuff.
That poor man, what he went through as the husband. And, you know, it just shows you, you know, for me, again, that just showed how much power women have over their husbands. And, you know, and I mean, we could, that in itself is a discussion for another day, but this guy was besotted with his wife. And you know how they manipulated the situation, and how he, in the beginning, before he even knows what's going on, he gets called in, and for the first time, the police officers tell him what's going on, the shock in his face and what have you, you know. And then first saying, oh no, Jody is a wonderful, but then the next interview, he spills the tea.
It's like he wakes up, and I'm looking at the comments. It looks like we have people that are interested in the Zoom. So we'll chat about, because I will say though, and I'm just going to leave it at this, just to have a think about this, because if you listen to, especially Kevin Franke's police interviews after he wakes up and starts spilling the tea, what really got me, and we've talked about this a lot, Shanti, is controlled opposition. And I think what's happened in our little community, our little disclosure community or truther community, I've talked about this a lot. The cabal is many things, but stupid ain't one of them. This is spiritual warfare. We have controlled opposition. And what I'm seeing happening in a lot of these, especially these Telegram groups, Shanti and I have been put on witch hunts before. is that people think they're confusing their imagination with their intuition. And they're going on these
Absolutely.
vigilante witch hunts. And what has happened in the Hildebrandt case, and if you especially, we'll talk about this more on Wednesday, especially if you listen to the metaphysical paranormal stuff that was not mentioned until now, it is a replica of what is going on in a lot of these truth or telegram groups where innocent people are being abused, hunted, and being accused of things they're not doing in the name of God. And I'm just going to say this before we move on. We'll talk a lot about the law. I'm trying to get Mr. Fox to come on as well and talk about this from the law of one's perspective. If you are following anybody that tells you that they have a special connection to God, that they're a prophet, that they have some connection to God that you don't have, that is a red flag for the negative polarity. People saying there's some truthers that are saying I'm the only one that can talk to the extraterrestrials. I'm the only one that has a seat on the Galactic Federation of the that's that flag. And this is what Jody Hildebrandt was doing. So yes, there are people who have certain gifts, but the way they deliver those gifts for the light is very vastly different than the dark. Like if you work with Shanti, I've worked with Shanti offline for healing stuff. Shanti, when I work with you, you have me lead you. You ask me the questions and I lead you down the path of my own healing. Okay? That's of the light. When somebody is seeing you, when we are all, some of us have different gifts than others, but we see each other all as equals. When we're of the dark, though, there's a pecking order. There's a better bloodline. There's royalty. And Jody Hildebrandt, from what I understand of these journal entries of Ruby's, did you see, Shanti, that she was calling her Jody? Like they think that she was calling her God Jody or Goddess Jody in the journals. Wild.
Goddess, yeah.
That she had it was believed that she had some special communication power with God that nobody else had. And she was able to manipulate this as the holder of truth. Huge red flag. So if you are following somebody that's saying, only I can do this, or only I have this power, or only I have a seat at the Galactic Federation, or the extraterrestrials only speak to me, or I'm a prophet. There's no such thing as a prophet. We're all prophets. All of us are prophets, right? Nobody has the authority to ordain you with any information about God except for you. All right. And so I just think that's so important. I hope when you guys listen to this stuff, consider what you're seeing in this extreme case, and then consider what you're seeing on Telegram, and you will see where the darkness has infiltrated the truth of world, right? And so I agree with you, Shanti. This is such an important case, just beyond child abuse. This is just an important case in general for us to get our head on straight. And yes, you are right. I think Ruby Franke is one of the most manipulative human beings I've ever come across in my whole entire life. Somebody said at least Jody Hildebrandt, even though her phone records from prison show she's a fucking psychopath, at least she ain't lying about who she is.
Yeah.
Ruby Franke is manipulating the hell out of it.
Yeah. And, for me, one of the big things, and I want to just end off saying this, is it's so how they take the scriptures and turn them into something else, is they like flip them and manipulate them and read it as something completely different to what the original intention was. I mean, that's why I say this is exactly.
And I do think that the Mormon church is going to play a very important role as a whole. I thought about this a lot in the sense that we know, as somebody who was not raised Mormon, I can objectively look at Joseph Smith and tell you, yeah, he was a pedophile. And he was a con artist, and he was a psychopath. I can look at
the Mormon Church is part of the Illuminati. It's one of the 5 pillars of the Illuminati. So
just like the Christian church, it's just a manipulation. And I can look at the Book of Mormon. I've read it myself for shits and giggles a long time ago, and I can say, yeah, this is fantasy. This is fiction. This is not. We know scientifically that this is not true. But because Mormonism is such a new religion, it's easy for us to understand that. But we also have to understand that about the Bible as well. We know the Bible that we have is what is it called, Shanti? The slave Bible. it's not the word of God. It's made up, it's fabricated. The real Bible is under the Vatican. We've only seen some of the missing books. And so I think that the role, whatever the devil will use for bad, God will use for good, right? So I think the Mormon church is going to make it easy for everyone to go like, hold on a second. God is not a book. God is not confined to a book that was written by man, right? God is something, we don't need a book for God. Yeah. So I do think if I can sit back for a second, that there's going to be a really important role that Mormons in the Mormon church are going to play just in the general awakening of the world. And we'll just have to sit back and see. We're playing, this is a game of chess, not checkers. I don't know how to play chess. So I'd be screwed if it was a real game of chess, because I don't know how to play chess. I know how to play checkers though. I could just talk about this. I've been obsessed with this case this whole weekend, and I cannot wait to hear on Wednesday what you guys have to say about this. So yeah. All right. So do you have anything else you want to say on that, Shanti, or should we move over to the Knights of Malta?
I think we should move on to part 2 of the Knights of Malta. And I want to just say, please, we'll still decide how we're going to handle Wednesday on solutions. When we look further into that, and it would be great if you guys from your side can go and check out as well what is going on and just come up with some stuff. And we can definitely have a discussion.
I started cracking up laughing when the paranormal card was flipped. I was like, I did not see that coming. And I just wanted, Jessica, you said my grandmother on my mother's side is related to Emma Smith, his first wife. Joseph Smith is evil as hell. I'll have to tell you guys a really funny thing. My boyfriend can't stand Taylor Swift. Like, I know a lot of us have issues with her because she's high up in this organization. But he literally cannot handle looking at her. He's like, there's nothing behind her eyes. She's evil. Well, he just found out this past weekend that he's actually distantly related to her. So
oh dear.
It's okay. I'm 5th cousins to William and Harry, so it's okay. We've all got those skeletons in our closets. We can't help that. That's just what happens. So yeah.
Indeed.
Anyway, well, speaking of this same group, this notorious group, let's get back to the Romanovs and the Knights of Malta, you guys, because we're going to talk about Mad King Paul in the second part of the Knights of Malta, which are, talk about another, which you guys go back. Last week, we had a pretty long episode kind of breaking down the history we know of the Knights of Malta and how the Knights of Malta created the 3-letter agency, how the Knights of Malta were listed in the email leak of 2017. So this is not just a cute little, community service group that your dad wants to join. This is a very nefarious, they're still a sovereign entity under international law. And so I kind of started with
going now, because I actually heard, and I'm sure that actually comes from Jesse, that they are no longer around, the Knights of Malta.
They still have a seat at the UN.
Okay, well then,
so
are still around.
I think that they have different seat. In my research on DuckDuckGo, not on Google, I learned that allegedly the headquarters in Italy isn't the real headquarters. It's like the decoy headquarters. The real headquarters is actually in this small town in Pennsylvania, which I'm not going to say the name of the town because I don't want to but you can look it up on DuckDuckGo, you guys. And I love that. We're starting to learn that there's a lot of decoy everything. Cause even looking at, I've been doing a deeper look into Egypt, perhaps being in America and not in Africa. And I came across this idea that the African Egypt is the decoy Egypt. So we have a lot of these decoys around the world. And, we have 10 times the amount of pyramids in the United States that are it's so where things are geographically located, I will give them a slow clap that they really fooled us with a lot of this stuff. But just like the Kate Middleton situation, once there's a crack in the facade, it doesn't take long for the whole thing to come crumbling down. Right. And I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of this stuff is everything is starting to crumble, because even if we don't have the full truth, us peasants don't have the full truth. We know the shit they're peddling is a lie. You know, I
Yeah.
just don't know where, you know, the Cassiopeians will tell you, I'm kind of paraphrasing, that they've added 1,000 years to our timeline. And so what we think has happened, but in a different, it's like closer together. And, you know, I heard someone say once, like, I wouldn't be shocked if we learned that Christopher Columbus discovered Europe and not, it was flipped, that we were all on the American continent and then Europe got, which I kind of laughed and I was like, actually, nothing would shock me anymore. Like, that would not shock me at all, because and the good news about that is that we can't hold judgments anymore, right? Because we know that they try to conquer and divide, they try to pin us against each other. And so, but if nothing is true anyway, then we can let go of judgments, because nothing is true anyway. And we're all in the dark. All of us are in the dark. You know, all I know, and that's why I think, Shanti, we're really good about just work on yourself. Work on yourself. You are real. Your spirit is real. Work on that. Hold on to that truth, and just let everything else.
The body is your church.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, Guruji used to say, first and second series only necessary. The rest is just a circus. Like, right? So like the rest is just a circus. Like, it's just a circus, you know, focus on you and your sovereign soul. And no, don't let anybody, other organization try to control you. Don't let a YouTuber try to control you. You know that you are a sovereign being. And so, speaking of that, we did a huge thing on Catherine the Great, our little temptress, our little femme fatale with her wiener tables, and and we know that Catherine, I'm getting hot now, and we know that Catherine had a son, Paul. Okay, so now Paul, this is where the Knights of Malta come into play. Paul, coffee table, yeah, Karen Bishop, there is never going to be a coffee table that beats Catherine's coffee table. I don't care. That's Paul, you guys. So
He looks
Paul,
like a midget.
yeah, he's definitely, you can see the inbreeding coming out in some of these people, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely looks like, I don't know if it was just a bad artist.
You would think the artist would like actually paint them to be more pleasant looking, because there wasn't photography back then. Well, I'm fascinated by Paul, and I'm not saying Paul is slow for sure. Well, Paul, Jessica, I will say this. Let's talk about Paul, because Paul was obsessed with the Knights of Malta, and that's why I felt like I needed to do a deep dive in the Knights of Malta, because in 1798, Napoleon invaded Malta. That's quite a forehead. Yes. That's that inbreeding, I think. At least he doesn't have a hot spurt chin. Some of them had. All right. So in 1798, Napoleon invaded, and that's where we left off with the Knights of Malta last week. They had taken over. Charles V had given them these islands in the Mediterranean, Tripoli, Malta, Gozo. So they went from being the Order of St. John to the Order of Rhodes to the Knights of Malta, with their war against the Ottoman Empire. And they held Malta as their land until 1798, when Napoleon invaded. Okay. And I know that there's conspiracies out there with true history. Like, did Napoleon even exist? I know that. And maybe he didn't exist. I feel like I'm able to hold multiple realities in my brain and just take everything with a grain of salt. So I did want to put that out there. But regardless, something happened in 1798 where Malta lost. The Knights of Malta lost Malta. We also know in like 1801, I think, or maybe it was 1805, early 1800s, this is when Napoleon sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States. So in Louisiana back in that day was the whole Western Territory, not just the state. So whoever this Napoleon person was, whether he existed really or not, something was going on around the late 1700s, early 1800s. I'm not sure exactly when the supposed mud floods were supposed to have happened. I think they date that closer to the end of the 1800s. But regardless, something at the end of the 18th century, moving into the 19th century, there was some moving and shaking going on. Things were getting sold and territories were getting moved around. So this is when Paul, who is the emperor of Russia at this time, he's been the emperor for like 2 years now since his mother died, offers the Knights of Malta refuge in Russia. All right. So this is when Knights of Malta at this point, changed their territory from Malta to Russia. We do know, which I also find fascinating, because the Cassiopeians have spoken about Russia's role in all of this, because we know Russia's a big player in our timeline right now. And according to them, again, I'm paraphrasing, so please go and read. Always take everything I say with a grain of salt too, guys. I'm not excluded from this. Like, take everything I say and go and research it for yourself. I highly recommend reading the Cassiopeian board for yourself. But they talk about, because I'm paraphrasing you guys, so I don't want things to get lost in translation, that Russia was heavily responsible for the fall of Atlantis. So that is why Russia is having to play a big role right now in the course correction. I kind of take it to mean that, or whatever's going on right now. That's why Russia is so important, is because they were hugely responsible for what was going on with Atlantis. Now, when Atlantis happened, question mark there. I think none of us really know dates and times. So I just wanted to make that correlation, because Paul in 1798 moves in this notoriously satanic, most powerful group in the world to Russia. And because he does this, he is then offered the Grand Master position. He becomes the Grand Master of the Knights of Malta. Okay, he's the 72nd Grand Master. All right, now let's back up a little bit and talk about Paul. Because I actually, even though he did this with the Knights of Malta, I still have the capacity to have a lot of empathy for Paul. I think Paul is, out of all of these people who are born into this group, these families, most of them learn from I know Jesse says that, and Caleb, they talk about how your indoctrination, your training into this group starts at a very young age, like from the time before you're even born, even sometimes, the abuse. So we see that a lot of these controller club members will say, by the time they're adults and they have like real power, they've been so indoctrinated into this organization that they're able to carry forward what they were trained to do. But occasionally, if we look throughout history, we see cracks. And I think what we see with Paul is a huge crack. I think we see a huge signs of PTSD, of post-traumatic stress disorder. I think we see huge signs of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I think with Paul, this is why I have empathy for him. I think he was a souled person. He had a soul. And I think what we're seeing with his behavior are actual side effects of trauma and him not knowing how to process what was happening. So does that mean he was a good person? Not necessarily. But I do have empathy for the little baby boy who was heavily abused. And we're going to talk about what we know. I mean, there's so much we don't know that we can only speculate, but what we know. So backing up, Paul was born on October 1 of 1754. Again, he was born 9 years after Catherine and his father Peter were married. And there was speculation that Paul was the child of her lover, but we know Peter had mental issues. Sometimes mental issues are passed down. So we're going to see some of the same mental issues, like maybe bipolar disorder or schizophrenia with Paul. Paul also looked just like the Romanovs. So there was no denying genetically who his father was. So he was taken from Catherine immediately after birth and was basically raised by Empress Elizabeth. So he had no contact with his mother. And then he's going to have a lot of issues, as we learned with Catherine. He's the one that started the whole horse rumor about her getting boinked by a horse, and that's how she died. So like, you really hate your parent if you're going to create that story as an adult, as a 40-something-year-old adult about your mom. All right. So now Empress Elizabeth took Paul and basically there was speculation that she was going to actually leave her empire to Paul and not Peter, which didn't happen. But he was so neglected as a baby. This broke my heart that there are actual entries by his courtiers where, as a baby or toddler, he would fall out of his crib at night crying. You know, kids try to crawl out and they're crying, they want attention. nobody would come to him. They would find him sleeping on the floor in the morning. This child had no love from the time he was taken from his mother, raised by his great aunt, but even she did not give him any type of affection as a baby. No cuddling, no wiping away tears, no kisses on skint knees. On top of that, Paul was obviously the only child of Catherine and Peter. And a lot of times the royal children are obviously kept very separate from the peasants. But when you have a lot of royal children, siblings, they at least have each other, right? They have each other. Paul was kept very isolated from all children. He was only around his tutors, his adult tutors. He was fluent in 5 languages. He studied literature, history, math, and science, architect, chess, and military sciences. And so from a very young age, Paul was in a world of his own. And so what started to happen, and I'm just going to kind of pair, and I can understand this happening, is that Paul, it's important for children to be around other children. I think we know that in 2024, children need to be around other children. It's important for their social development. A child's brain only development, we don't finish developing our brain until we're 25. So it's important for like 8, 9, 10-year-olds to be around other 8, 9, 10-year-olds, right? It's important. But because Paul didn't have friends at all, he was kept away. He didn't get the love from his parents, his family. He didn't have friends. He started to create an imaginary world that he lived in. So as I'm researching this, as a child, now it's common for children to have like imaginary friends. That's common, but they usually grow out of it. Paul created imaginary friends for himself because he had no one else. So as he grew up, though, because he was so isolated and so abused, I'm assuming there was probably some sexual abuse. I'm assuming because of this group, there was probably a lot of physical abuse, but we don't have that on record. But we do absolutely can say that there was mental and emotional abuse. These imaginary friends, this imaginary world he created, he never grew out of. He held on to this imaginary world throughout his adult life as well. I see that as his own survival. He was constantly seen talking to himself. And when I learned, when you think about this and his obsession with the Knights of Malta, for me, as an empathetic person, it almost seems like Paul was searching. It's like, why kids in the ghetto join gangs? They're looking for family. They're looking for a place to belong. His mother, he was 8 years old when his aunt died. Then his mother overthrew his father's reign in 1762. So even though Paul didn't have much of a relationship with his mother or his father, the psychological effects that has to also have on a child. I mean, you think about, like, I'm a product of divorce. Like, you think about, I know a lot of people watching are products of divorce. Think about the trauma you went through just with your parents going through a divorce. Now imagine your mother that you have no connection to because she didn't hold you as a baby, no fault of her own at this point, has now overthrown your father and then had him murdered by one of her lovers. For a psychopath or a narcissist, that might not be a big deal. But Paul's reaction to this tells me that this was a very sensitive child. This was a child who actually had a soul. And in my opinion, if he had been raised under the right circumstances, I think he probably would have been a very loving, very wonderful human. But because of how he was raised, I think this is what caused him to go. They called him Mad King Paul. And he went crazy. Now, he was also referred to as the Russian Hamlet because what's Hamlet about? Hamlet is about a man who is taking revenge for the murder of his father. So he was known throughout Europe as the Russian Hamlet. So all over Europe in all the courts, people are talking about the fact that you're Hamlet because your mama killed your daddy, and now they think you're seeking revenge for your mama killing your daddy. Now, also because of that, he did not trust his mother. Now imagine thinking your mother is going to try to have you assassinated. He spent his whole childhood after his mother took over his father's reign, because remember, a lot of the czars backed Catherine because they thought Catherine was going to rule as regent for Paul until he turned 18, which didn't happen. So now Paul's thinking, oh shit, my mother is going to kill me. She's going to have me assassinated. And then your mother is also paranoid that you're going to have her assassinated because you're actually a Romanov. Your mother's not a Romanov, you are. So there is a lot going on with Paul emotionally. And so I don't know if you have anything you want to say on that with your knowledge of the controllers.
Yeah, I want to just say this as well. And I'm liking what Mia's saying here, because I was going to actually say that. He was bloodline Cabal. If he was bloodline Cabal, he would have been trained and exposed to magic and creatures and rituals from a young age, like all system children. And I agree with that, because it's, again, when you were talking about his emotional neglect in the beginning, and yes, I think it was common in those days that children were seen and not heard.
Yeah.
Children were nowhere near as understood and pampered, etc., as a loving family is in this day and age. So I think, and especially, a baby was a baby who didn't know any different, and would forget all its trauma when it was a child, and growing up, then it was expected to be a normal adult. It's only in recent years that research like that has been done, right?
Yeah.
But I also agree that if he was a Cabal child, I would actually be interested to know, and if anyone in the chat knows that, or Bryce, maybe we can also check up on that at some point. When did this, the actual ritual abuse, the satanic ritual abuse, when did that actually officially start?
I don't know, because we have no records of that. All I have records of that I can say for sure is that he was absolutely, I can't say for sure that he was.
It would seem that he was being ritually abused.
Yeah, absolutely. Speculation, I can absolutely say, my opinion, he probably was being ritually abused.
I'd be interested to know, though, as like the way they do it in recent years, it's very systematic, it's very contrived, it's very deliberate, the way they do it to the kids and even pregnant women and stuff like that. I'd be interested to know, when did they cotton on exactly to that? Was this just like when we were looking at Paul going back, was this just normal child neglect and they really just didn't give a shit?
I don't think so. I think that other royal children, again, had their siblings. I think that's a huge element here too. It's easier, not that trauma is easy, but I think if your siblings are also going through the same, you look at pictures of, speaking of the royal family, you look at the relationship between Prince George and Princess Charlotte. It's a beautiful, from the outside it looks like, but they seem to be very connected. You look at Anne and Charles, they're very connected. I think that with siblings, they trauma bond, right? But Paul didn't have any of that. Now, what's interesting, this was in the late, he was born in the mid 1700s. And only thing I can reference back is I did a deep dive, and we talked about this a long time ago. It's probably on your first channel, Shanti. We talked about Catherine de Medici, who this was in like the 1500s. And she was kind of like the Rothschild, married into the Valois line of France. And Nostradamus was her like warlock person, right? And she was known as a serpent queen. She was obviously practicing black magic. She was, and this is noted that she was sexually abusing her children as kids. And we had record of them being gossip around town that she was eating babies. So if we can reference back to the 1500s from the Valois family line, we do have records of obviously
Right.
something going on,
There
right?
was, I mean, but also there's statues all over of these disgusting creatures
Yeah.
eating and devouring babies and throwing them into fires and stuff like that. So this has certainly been going on for a very long time. So most definitely, you would have. Okay, yeah, I agree, me. But for me, it's also I'm trying to understand or figure out exactly when it was as contrived as having handlers.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh,
that
I'm
sort of
sure
thing.
he had plenty of handlers because he was kept isolated from
Yeah,
all the other.
definitely
He had,
isolated.
and I think, the Cassiopeians have spoken about disassociation. And they have, and again, I'm totally paraphrasing what they say, but I found this very, very interesting. An organic portal, a person who doesn't have a soul, which I know Mr. Fox have spoken about this. Organic portals typically cannot survive the trauma that they go through with the what they do in these rituals. The
Yeah,
only people who survive these traumas are souled beings, because souled beings with souls, can disassociate. So disassociation is a sign of somebody who does have a soul. And so for the cabal, from what I gathered, when they do these rituals and kids die, they just discard them anyway because they were organic portals. They see them, oh, they're not usable to us. Now with Paul, with him projecting this imaginary world, I see that as a major form of disassociation, where he had disassociated from the reality that he lived in order to create a fantasy world, in order for his mind to survive the trauma, because it was hard to. So that, marrying all this information with what the Cassiopeians have said, makes a lot of sense to me. And and maybe that is why he was such a threat to his mother, because with a souled being, and then remember, you guys, I think this gets lost a lot. Bill Gates, the royal family, these are all souled beings, just like we are. You cannot go fourth density negative without having a soul. We're in third density. This is the planet of choice. We have to make choices. Are we going to be service to self or service to others? Are we going to serve the negative path or the path of positive, the light? And the law of one says both are paths. We have to pick. So what this group is doing, these group of controllers, is they are actively on this dark path as their spiritual practices. They've chosen that. They can't advance with an organic portal. So what we're looking at is a lot of souled beings making horrific decisions, right? But with Paul, what I'm seeing is a crack in the training, because, we see this, and again, we see this, and I don't know if maybe Paul was a wanderer who got messed up, because that's the problem with wanderers, is that they come back to third density and they're back into the laws of karma again. And that's the scary thing about wanderers, is that they can be trapped back in. There's a story Ra talks about with when Venus was going through its ascension to fourth density positive, and two wanderers were sent to help, and they ended up accidentally forming a cult, and they went negative. They had to go back the cycle negative. So is that what happened with Paul? I don't know. These are all speculations. But yes, as far as what we have on record, I can safely say on record, he was mentally and emotionally abused. I suspect, my suspicions are that he was also ritually abused, sexually traumatized, physically, but we don't have that on record. Now, I talked about this with Catherine. Paul was married at the age of 18 to Natalia, this woman. Now, he had, at this point, had made one friend his own age, just one. So he loved his friend, this one person who was late teens, that he finally had a friend his own age. Well, Natalia died in childbirth, and she ended up having a stillborn. So her and the baby died, and apparently Paul was completely just devastated by this, which anybody would be. Even though this was an arranged marriage, I think for Paul, this was some sense. We're again, his obsession with the Knights of Malta. We're looking at a boy, because at 18, you're still a boy, that's desperately seeking a place to belong. He's desperately seeking that love and that family unit. And so he went into a deep depression when Natalia and the baby died. Now, Catherine, being a fucking bitch, excuse my language, could not figure out why Paul wasn't snapping out of it, why he was still depressed. So she brings a box from Natalia's personal possessions and claims that this is a box full of love letters between Paul and his best friend, and that she was having an affair with his best friend, this one friend he has who's his age, and the baby probably wasn't even his. She's doing this to try to get him to snap out of this depression. But what does that do to Paul? Makes it 10 times worse. He's even more devastated. At this point, Paul can't trust anyone. So he goes even crazier. Because now he thought he had this friend. And who knows? I don't know what the truth is. There's a lot of historians that say, no, Natalia was not having an affair. This was all concocted by Catherine to get him to snap out of it. There are other historians that say maybe there was truth to it. Regardless, Catherine, if Natalia was having an affair with his best friend, what was the point? Ignorance is bliss sometimes. Why would you hurt your child even more? Natalia's passed away. The child's passed away. Your son's in mourning. Why add salt to that wound? Why? That's some nasty mean girl shit. Like, why do that to your child? Right? So that was another blow. So Paul then remarries another woman. He ends up having a pretty good marriage with it. They have like 10 kids. And we're going to talk about Alexander next week because there's a huge conspiracy. Y'all, I just keep finding more and more conspiracy theories with this family. Like, this is the Mac Daddy of. So we're going to talk a little bit about Alexander next week. But Catherine does to Paul and his second wife what Empress Elizabeth did to Catherine. So when Alexander is born, the first child is born, Catherine comes in and takes Alexander from them. So she's repeating what was already done. She ends up taking the second son from him too, which we'll get into next week. They end up having like 10 kids though, which is where the Romanov line, which we're going to get to with Nicholas II and that whole murder with his kids, because this is where this is coming from. So I don't blame Paul for hating his mother. I don't blame him for having the fury of God. I don't blame him. And part of me wonders, did Catherine molest him? That part of me kind of goes into that mindset too. I don't know, but is that a possibility?
Sure. You know, if we're looking at the system and how it treats its kids, Catherine was probably as clueless as someone. I mean, when you're just looking at this whole generational abuse, right? She would probably have had the same thing happen with her. So she was as clueless as anyone else, and literally inflicting the same thing and becoming a perpetrator herself. So human nature is human nature. So that probably would have been the same as what it is now. I mean, when you're looking, as I said, I mean, all of us on this channel will have watched someone, you know, especially if you've watched some of the survivors and the overcomers that I've interviewed, there is something very real called generational abuse. Yeah. And it just carries on from one lineage to the other, one generation rather to the other. And it seems that she would have had it as well. Yeah. And so she would have inflicted, and that's why she wouldn't have had the empathy or the understanding to get him out of his depression and do something kind, you know, and therefore use more abusive and manipulative tactics because, you know, to try and snap him out of it. So it just shows me, you know, when we're looking at stuff like this, how these cycles and how long ago they started. Yep. Not much in human beings has changed. You know, we were looking at our side. I mean, yes, we've evolved and we understand more now and there's more available to us. But when we look at the base ways of humans, if you want to call it that, it's still the same. There's that generational thing. There's that inflicting pain. the inability to get out of these hectic cycles. Maybe more and more people are getting out of it now, which is why we, for the first time, have so many survivors and whistleblowers that are actually speaking up. In those days, there was not any of that going.
Who are they going to speak up to? Like, that's why, you know, people like idolize King James or the King James Bible. I'm like, you guys, just go and read the reports of his courtiers. They would write about him raping little boys. Like, that's not the person you want to be venerating. You know, like, wake up, truthers, wake up, like, totally wake up. Like, this is not good. Well, Alexander, it does seem that Paul was a little different with his kids. I didn't see any. We're going to talk about Alexander next week. It seems like Paul and Alexander, actually, the only thing is that Catherine, there was a rumor that Catherine was going to make Alexander the Tsar. And Paul was like, oh, hell no. I've been put up with this my whole life. I'm going to be Tsar. So when she died, he rushed to the palace, got rid of the will. But he wasn't Tsar for that long. But there does seem to be a pretty good relationship between Alexander and Paul. So maybe there was some sort of lessening of the blows. I don't know. But I do want to say that for the short time, because Paul was eventually assassinated. We'll get to that. He was essentially murdered. So 1796, he becomes Tsar with Catherine's death. In 1798, he brings the Knights of Malta to Russia. He becomes the Grand Master of the Knights of Malta. But also during his short reign as the Tsar, he ended tax exemption from nobilities. This is what's leading up to his assassination. He comes down hard on the nobles. He ends their tax exemption.
Dear. Oh, dear.
Yep. He also makes them eligible for the death penalty. So before this time, nobles weren't eligible for the death penalty.
They could just do what they wanted.
Literally
get away with murder and torture and depravity.
Literally. So that tells me that he definitely had some aggression towards the nobility.
Yeah.
Because he was like, you're going to pay your taxes like the peasants, and you're no longer exempt from the death penalty. So you can't go doing stuff to people because you now are going to also be accountable to the law.
Yeah.
He did get rid of a lot of the state. So no one was there working in the government. Things got neglected. He kind of got rid of the government. So things kind of started to fall apart in Russia. He overturned a lot of his mother's policies. He basically, in his madness, was like on a warpath to destroy Russia, basically. Or I think he was trying to destroy the nobles. It ended up, kind of destroying Russia. But so he got more and more paranoid. He stopped sleeping. His wife would have to walk the halls with him at night because he would be speaking gibberish, and she didn't want him bothering the guards. Nobles started to make a plan to remove him. Alexander was aware. His son was aware that the nobles wanted to remove him, but Alexander said, do not harm a hair on his head. If you remove my father, do not harm him. Alexander was very strict about that. You don't touch. If you remove him from Tsar and you make me the Tsar, do not hurt my father. Well, obviously, that didn't happen. He did write a letter to his descendants that was supposed to be opened 100 years from his death. It's been 100 years now, and who knows what that letter said. I'm curious. So he died in what?
No record of it.
Yes. Where is, let me see.
Where's that letter? I want to see that letter.
He was assassinated on the 11th of March, 1801. So it would have been opened on the 11th of March, 1901. So
yeah,
where the hell's that letter? I just found that in my new
200 and something years already. So we want that letter.
Where's that letter? What did he tell? Because it would have been Nicholas II, the guy that was killed by the Volkovich, that would have opened the letter. So as one of his descendants. So what's in that letter? Like, I want to know, because then the Volkovich came and they killed all the czars. So where is the letter? I'm sure somebody's got it somewhere. And is that why they killed the Romanovs? Was there the information in that letter that they didn't want getting out? Like, I'm just curious. Anyway, so I found this interesting too. There was an imprisoned monk in Russia named Abel. Abel was imprisoned because he was a prophet. He could see the future. Again, we're all prophets, but he was psychic. And he actually prophesied Catherine's death. So he was in prison for it, because that's regenerative. You can't talk about the death of a king or a queen, right? That's considered treason. So Paul would go and visit Abel, because Paul wanted information from Abel. And Abel told Paul his reign would be short. It was only 5 years, and that he would be strangled. And he actually told Paul the date it would happen, March 11th, 1801. So the night that Paul was killed, he was killed by 12 people. 12 nobles came to his house and strangled him. They do say that he put up a fight against these 12 people, but there was like an acceptance almost at the end, which kind of makes me think he was just trying to be put out of his misery. Like, his life had been so horrific. Like, I cannot even imagine. I mean, at that point, he probably just surrendered to it. And apparently the country celebrated once he was killed. But again, I want to next week, I want to talk about his son Alexander, because there is a conspiracy theory that's fascinating around Alexander. I just think, I don't know about you, Shanti, but I just think Paul is I think Paul's story gets kind of missed because of Catherine, his mother. Yeah. But I think Paul's story is actually way more important than Catherine's. And I think Paul's story says more about Catherine than any other story out there.
Yeah.
So he was assassinated 1801. Again, we're leading up to the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 1900s. So I do want to focus on his son, because there's a lot of conspiracy theories around his next son. I will get into his reaction to his father's death, because again, he did not want his father to be killed. And so what does that say to you, Shanti? Do you think that Paul was raising his children the same way he was raised, or do you think that there was some sensitivity there?
I want to almost say my first intuition, my first instinct is to say no.
Yeah.
But I don't think it would have been completely kind and sensitive.
Yeah.
I think there would have been moments of abusiveness, call it that. But I think generally he would have been more kind and sensitive. Yeah, that's my first feeling.
That was kind of they might have been taught some things as far as occultism, but it just, because of Alexander's love for his father, and almost like empathy, like his father, almost like he knew.
Yeah.
Alexander was taken by Catherine, his grandmother. And we're going to see, like, it was reported that Alexander definitely was, at the time, we're going to talk about more about him next week. He didn't show the mental disabilities that his father in the beginning showed. And so people, naturally, he would have made a better leader. He was more pragmatic. But Alexander did not want to be Tsar. And we're going to talk more about, there's a huge conspiracy theory. He absolutely did not want to be the Tsar. That was not on his bingo card. He did not want to do that. And so we're going to get into him next week, because again, huge conspiracy theory around him. And then we'll bop over to Nicholas II and what happened with the Bolshevik and the Anastasia Romanoff conspiracy. But because Nicholas II, Anastasia's father, was not a descendant of Alexander. He was a descendant of one of Alexander's siblings, which we'll get into. But he was a direct descendant of Paul, because it was one of Paul's kids. So yeah, I can't wait to hear what you guys think about that. This Paul, normally I like to make fun of these people, but with Paul's story, my heart breaks for him. My heart absolutely. And I will say, if you guys go on, I think it's Hulu in the United States, it's a streaming platform. There is the show Catherine the Great. We've talked about it, played in Helen Mirren plays Catherine. The actor who plays Paul in this series did a phenomenal job. Like, he played Paul in the way that I envisioned Paul from what I've researched of Paul. One thing I forgot to mention too, there's something else that Paul's quite famous for, the Russian steppe. Paul was obsessed with the military. You know how the Russian steppe?
Oh, yeah.
So Paul was obsessed, like his father was obsessed with the military, was obsessed with parades, and he created the Russian steppe, the way they step. So that's something that Russia still holds from Paul to this day.
Wow.
Is the step. So when you guys
Not
see
the goose
that,
step.
the goose step, yeah. So when you see that, because he was obsessed with parades, so he wanted a parade, you know, again, that imaginary world, and I think with the military, again, there was some sense of control, some sense of, you know, as commander, your commander in chief of the military. Yeah. So when you guys see the Russians marching, that and the way that they march so differently from the rest of the world, that was created by Paul. That's Paul's mark on the Romanov lineage. So, but yeah, I can't wait to hear what everybody, I mean, it's such a sad story. It's a fast story because he didn't live that long as a czar, and really his big major like juiciness comes from the Knights of Malta and that whole breakdown of that. But yeah, I cannot wait to hear what people have to say about Paul, because I would be curious to see what someone like Caleb or Jesse would have to say about Paul and their inkling, looking at his story of what was going on with him, because he definitely was not the stone cold psychopath that a lot of these people, I mean, he didn't do great things. I don't want to be very clear about that. He was not very nice to the military, and there was some things he did that was not good. But you see, I think that there's not only trauma, but there's guilt there. There's PTSD, there's anxiety disorders, you know, all sorts of stuff going on with Paul that we just don't see that with other people in this club, right? We don't see that reaction from other people like we see with Paul. So,
well, look forward to seeing what next week holds then, Bricey Boo. So
Progressive Fest. That's what, again, guys, that's all history is. When your kids come home and complain about their history homework, just be like, y'all, it's a gossip. It's a class on gossip is all it is. That's all history is. It's a class on gossip. So,
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, thank you for that. Interesting as usual. And
then for Wednesday.
Yeah. And guys and gals, Wednesday on Solutions with Aquarius Rising Africa. Yeah, we'll be following up more on the Jody Hildebrand and Ruby Franke case with a lot more information that's just come to the fore in the last few days, actually. So we're going to be following up on that. Watch the space. We'll let you know what's going to happen with that. So in the meantime, have yourselves a beautiful Monday and take care of yourselves. And God bless you all. And if you haven't already...
Reminder, sorry to interrupt you guys. On Friday, you guys, Shanti, Jessica Jones, and I go on my channel. I've got it up. We talked about cryptids. And it was fascinating because Shanti and we can talk about ghosts and demons, but we don't know shit about cryptids. So it was awesome. And we're going to do part 2. We're going to talk more about it on this Friday. We're going to do another episode. Yeah. So if you guys have not seen it on my channel and you want to see Shanti and I as novices at something,
that was great. She's fantastic, that girl.
Yes, I can't wait to see her on your show. Yeah, Jessica's fantastic.
Yeah, so. She's going to be joining. She's going to be joining me on the show, as well. Yeah. So watch the space. Some cool new guests in the pipeline. Yay. Okay, everybody. Take good care of yourselves. God bless you all. And we shall see you very soon. And again, thank you again to all our Patreons for just being cool and being awesome. Thank you, guys. God bless you.
Bye, everybody.